That's right. All right, Alice, you can take it away with your presentation.
All right, can you see my screen? Okay, so as you said, my project was originally in French, but since I'm in a French immersion class, but I changed it to English so that everybody can understand. And my project this year was with the inquiry question of how did the Second World War contribute to the development of the Canadian space industry? Um, so I found that this happened in four ways. So first, there was the preparation for the Second World War. The NRC, or the National Research Council in Canada, which was the main organization of the government for science, they got more funding and help from the government in 1939 in those early stages of the war. And then also all over the country, scientists such as John T. Henderson, which you can see in the middle photo, started researching and developing expertise in scientific fields related to the war, such as ballistics, but this can also translate into space travel. And finally, civilian companies across the country started building goods to help in the war, such as the boat that you see in the bottom right. Then, once the war came around, we have many scientists and governments that started to actually develop scientifically, such as Donald C. Rose, who you can see to your left, who was a Canadian scientist with the NRC. He worked in ballistics and discovered many things in that field. And he received many important jobs. He even became the scientific advisor for the General Chief of Staff of Canada. Then there's Werner von Braun, who's one of the more well-known scientists of the war and space age. So he was with the Nazis during the war and made the V2 rocket, which is known as the predecessor of most modern rockets. And so, but then he went after the war to America, United States, and he made the Redstone rocket for the Mercury program and the Saturn V rocket for the Apollo program, which took humans to the moon. Finally, the Government of Canada made the BCATP, which is the British Commonwealth Air Training Plan. It's a plan where Canadians and Europeans come over who are part of the Allies, and they get taught how to fly and how to repair airplanes so that they can go back and fight the war in Europe, so that there would be less of a trench war like World War I was, which is something that William Lyon Mackenzie King, our Prime Minister, really wanted. Um, uh, this developed aerial communications for rockets as well. Also during the war, we have many innovations that were important, such as the Hawker Hurricane, which you can see a model that I made on the left, which was a plane made by Canada that participated in the war effort, and it helped develop things in rockets such as aerodynamics. The proximity fuse, of which you can see a model of in the middle, and V2 rocket, they developed the use of solid propellant for suborbital rockets, whereas we use liquid propellant for those that actually go into outer space so that we can actually get farther with our launches and go farther into space. And finally, the glide bomb, which was an Axis Powers bomb, but it was the first ballistic or anything that could be guided, and it wasn't just set on a straight course and couldn't be changed at all. And this developed rocket guidance and communication. So then after the war, we have many Canadian space advances, such as the Alouette, which was Canada's first satellite, made us the third nation after the US and Russia to be a spacefaring nation. And it used a lot of the same system as glide bombs, as well as being made by some war veterans. You can see my model of it on the left there. Then we have the Black Brant and Averaro. The Black Brant I have a model of in the picture below. And they use solid propellant after testing through the proximity fuse in V2. And you can see how this stemmed off into two different ways, as the Black Brant was more scientific and the Averaro was for defense reasons, but they both used that same information. So this information was very helpful in all areas. Then finally, a lot of the things NASA has done, Canada has been a part of too, such as the Apollo missions. We made the lunar module feet, the part that actually touched the moon. And we have our own astronauts, as you can see, the first group, including Marc Garneau in the right picture. Marc Garneau was the first Canadian astronaut who went up in the 1980s. and we are finally a part of the ISS, the International Space Station, and 3 Canadians have lived aboard. So this all brought me to my conclusion that the preparation for the Second World War was really the start of Canadian space industry. Thank you. I will now have some questions.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you for that wonderful presentation, Alice. And I'll be getting into questions as you mentioned. So in your presentation, you talked about the National Research Council. What is the significance of that council when it comes to the ability for Canada to continue to innovate in contemporary society?
Well, so since the NRC was founded, which was in 1916, it was rather small since Canada, it wasn't very separated from the England and Great Britain. Um, it was more after the Second World War that we gained our independence, even though we had Confederation earlier. Um, so the NRC, well, it's still around today. It does not help as much because we have many more organizations such as the CSA, Canadian Space Agency, that are all developing these kind of things. But before we were as much of a scientific nation as we are now, it was very crucial.
Absolutely right on. What I was wondering is why is this topic and just understanding the history important for Canada on the global stage?
Well, mainly for World War II, we didn't actually document much of our part in many of the things such as D-Day, and so it's important to remember that we were the third nation to go into space after the US and America. And so it is important that we remember that we can, even though we're not like as well known as the US, we are still very capable and we can do many things. So um, we have done it, and it's good to know that we've done in the past and to see what we can accomplish to help inspire us to accomplish things further in the future.
Right on. So now talking about your research, because I can tell that you've done a lot of that, what was the most valuable resource for your project and why?
Um, I found quite a few books from the Vancouver Public Library about my topic, which were very helpful as they had a lot of information. And while you're searching online, it can be helpful because since it's easier to find things. But you know that the information in books is a lot more reliable since they took the time to get it edited and printed and published. So I found these books were very important as they helped me find information that I needed to make the connections from the Second World War to the Canadian space industry, as well as helping find some pictures that were helpful to put in my presentations and to have an idea of first resources that came from like around that period of time so that we could I could understand my project better.
Awesome. And what would you say was the most challenging for you in the entire process of putting your presentation and project together?
I found that finding resources proved to be a challenge, especially French resources. And But I eventually did find some through libraries and through ebooks from libraries across Canada that were helpful for those reasons. And another part that was somewhat challenging was finding the connections to put it all together in my report, since in my class we write a report along with our project. So those were one of the most difficult, but I found I improved in those areas as I worked on them.
Right on. Yeah, you've done a great job. And can you take us through briefly the process you took to build those models because you've made a lot of those and they look quite impressive.
Yeah, sure. I have some of them here. So, for example, this is my model of an Alouette, which was our first satellite. So mainly, I started by, these are all little pieces of cardboard, which I glued together after I painted on them the little blue markings to describe the solar cells that were on there to help charge the Alouette. Another fact about the Alouette was that the it was the longest, it was in space the longest of the satellites of its time. it wasn't up and operational for 10 years, which was longer than most of the US and Soviet satellites, which only lasted like max a year. So mainly I made the structures for my artifacts, and then I painted them after I put them all together, to make different shapes and make them look like as the pictures that I was basing them on. I also made, other than my physical artifacts, I made a song on the guitar in French about my project, that describes everything that was in my main presentation, just as a side artifact.
Amazing. Wow, you put in a lot of effort and it really shows. Last question as we wrap off here, or wrap up here. Do you want to go into research or engineering in the future? And what is it that motivated your interest in this topic?
So when I would like to be a Canadian astronaut when I grow up, and I really started becoming interested in this topic and in space when I was 9, and we went to the planetarium on a field trip. And the planetarium in Macmillan Space Center, you look up at the dome and you see the stars, and they take you through a video and a recording of the different like things like Mars, and it was very interesting. And this year we did a space unit in my class where we learned and developed and did a lot of extensions in space. And so I found I was really motivated, and that's where I based my idea for this project off. And I thought it would be interesting to see World War II, which is one of the most well-known historical events. How could it be connected, since I knew that's around when the CSA and the Canadians started going into space. I wondered if they were connected, since wars, they're obviously very bad, and since they're stemmed off problems and conflict, but they are also major points of um, creation and innovation. Since like with the Cold War between the US and the Soviets, that's when in 9 years we went from not having rockets to going to the moon. So that's how I got interested in this subject.
Well, amazing. Well, if you become an astronaut in the future, and I'm sure you will, we at Heritage Fairs we can claim that, we met a future astronaut back in 2021. So that's pretty awesome. All the best, and thank you for that presentation.
Thank you.